my name is Raina Peter, and I am a discussion group coordinator at the Dole Institute of Politics. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program made possible by Newman's Own Foundation. Today's program will be live streamed and available on our YouTube channel afterward. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel at any time. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. For virtual viewers, please send your questions to dolequestions@ku.edu. Please ask just one brief question. The Dole Institute's mission is to foster civil and respectful discussion around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones, and now please join me in welcoming the director of the Dole Institute, Audrey Coleman.
Thank you, Raina, for that warm welcome. It is so wonderful to see so many folks out at the Dole Institute this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and I think I have a pretty good idea of why you're here. We're all very excited to welcome our very own Senator Nancy Kassebaum. Not only are we celebrating her visit, but this is the very last installment of our discussion group hosted by our spring fellow, Bob Blaemire. His session has been dedicated to Giants of the Senate. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we're so pleased to have Senator Kassebaum be our finale for this season. Some of you might remember that Senator Kassebaum visited the Institute in 2018, and before that, she was with our own Senator Bob Dole here at the Institute in 2016. So it's such a treat to have her and host her. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll quickly cede the floor to our fellow Bob Blaemire to further introduce Senator Kassebaum and get to this discussion that I know we're all looking forward to. Thanks so much for being with us again. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you, Audrey. I want to add first, my name is Bob Blaemire, and the Dole discussion group's made possible by a grant from Newman's Own Foundation and are presented in partnership with the Howard H. Baker Center for Public Policy at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Illinois University, and the Frank Church Institute at Boise State University. This is my 9th trip to Kansas since November, which has been a great experience for me, and I've learned a lot about Kansas and a lot about Kansas history. And one thing that has become very clear is that among the first families of Kansas is the name Landon. And as I don't think I probably have to tell anybody here the history, but Alf Landon was a 2-term governor of Kansas in the 30s. He lived to be 100 years old and was able to experience the election of the Senate of his daughter, Nancy. Nancy Landon Kassebaum was elected to the Senate in 1978 and served 3 terms. She was only the 14th woman to serve in the United States Senate and the first to serve without having a husband previously serving in Congress. The first woman senator from Kansas as well. And I am honored beyond words to welcome her to the Giants of the Senate discussion. Senator, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. I hope I'm hooked up right so you can hear me.
You are.
Because I want to first say, I know that Bob would want me to start by saying, hurrah for the University of Kansas championship basketball. National championship.
Rock chalk, right?
But I am honored to be here. This is a special place, I think, for Bob. He was proud of the Institute, and we should all be very proud too. It's here on the campus, and the availability of students to be able to come visit. And I think as it grows, it continues to be of interest to those of us who are a little older to go back and see early pictures of what it was like not only in Bob's day, but before that even, of the campus and what the issues were and the interest. So it's an honor to be here today. The one time I remember such a fun time with Bob was the Kansas State Fair. And he and I held back and forth, sitting on we weren't on the hay bales, but we were right there by the hay bales. And we must have spent about 2 hours at least, you were there, back and forth and back and forth. And there were long lines of people, and we both answered questions, and I would usually accept whatever Bob said. After it was over, one of my sons said, "You know why there were such long lines?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It's because the championship pumpkin booth was right next to yours." And everybody wanted to see who had the champion pumpkin. But we had a wonderful time, and I am very proud of being able to be here today to say thank you. And thank you for coming today on this kind of weather. I can only say down in Morris County, our pastures are really glad we're getting some rain.
Senator Kassebaum was worried yesterday that the weather would affect the crowd, and I had left Washington, D.C. It was colder there than it was here. And since I've gone through some hellish snowstorms during my experience over the last several weeks, I'm delighted to have this weather. I think it's great. For those of you who haven't taken part or watched this series before, I'll just briefly say I got here kind of a circuitous route. I used to work for a senator from Indiana named Birch Bayh in the Senate and maintained a relationship with him until his death in 2019, and I wrote his biography. And because of that, I ended up doing a book event with the Dole Institute, and eventually got invited to do this, which has been fabulous. But when I started Birch and I started doing video interviews for the book, and the very first one I did with him, I decided to ask him first to tell me about the presidents he had met in his life. And reading about your life, I realized you knew William Howard Taft, who was president quite a bit before you were born. So how did that come about? You knew William Howard Taft?
No, I didn't know William Howard Taft. I'm not
I have a biography here that says you knew Taft. I assume that he was a friend of your father's.
Yes. I would hope so, not mine. I wasn't there yet. Then, I should say.
So tell me about your memories of presidents that you've met over the years.
Well, that's a puzzle.
You would have had Jimmy Carter would have been president when you came to Washington, right?
Yes, but I didn't meet him. I can't pull up a list of, it was not something that growing up, Dad never really went to Washington very much. I mean, Dad would assume if anyone wanted to talk to him, they'd come to
Kansas.
They'd come to Topeka.
Of course.
I can remember growing up. I remember this well with a neighbor of mine, was Betty Carmine, and we strung dandelion stems together. And she sat on one side of the road and I on the other, where we were living out in Topeka in Westchester Hills. And we'd yell, "Wilkie or Roosevelt?" And we were sure we knew how that was going to turn out. Every car that would stop, of course, we assumed was crossing this line that we'd strung up. So that's my experience when you ask who I met. In unusual ways.
And Wilkie was from Indiana, by the way. But okay, our program is Giants of the Senate, and if you reflect on your years of the Senate, I would like to try to think about who you would determine in those years who were the giants of the Senate.
Serving with me in the Senate at that time? Well, there was a different time in the Senate. Let me start by saying that. I would say today, I'd like to quote what President Abraham Lincoln said at one point. I believe in a debate. A house divided cannot stand. And right today, if you ask who I would admire, it would be someone who was trying to reach across the aisle, both Republican or Democrat. And certainly Bob Dole was one who knew how important it was to be able to compromise. And he has said, and I have heard him say, you cannot achieve a significant compromise that will last without legislation that will last without a compromise. And I think today we have forgotten. It doesn't mean you give up something, it means you work together to get something even better and stronger. And we've lost that. So when you ask who, I would have to say Bob Dole was someone who always realized how important it was, even if he might not have liked it himself at that point, but to work out something, and we will get into this later, I'm sure, that will work. And of course, then I married Howard Baker, who preceded Bob Dole when Howard left the Senate, and I didn't know him very well at that time. It was 1984, and then Bob became majority leader. Mm-hmm. So those were ones that stand out, because I think they're ones who worked with a goal in mind to achieve something.
Yeah, I would agree. In fact, again, my presence comes because of Birch Bayh and Bob Dole cooperated on the Bayh-Dole Act, which has changed this country in a lot of ways. And many people are not familiar with it, but it was that bipartisanship that made that happen. I look at the years when I worked there. I mean, there were a lot of giants in the Senate, both parties: Barry Goldwater, Jacob Javits,
sure.
Scoop Jackson, Frank Church. A lot of, and you served also with our current president, Joe Biden, the whole time you were there.
Well, you want to know a bill that we had?
Sure.
That didn't pass? In fact, it had quite a few no votes. It was a budget freeze.
A budget freeze.
A complete freeze of the budget. Defense, everything. And it was called the KGB Act. KGB budget freeze. And that's Kassebaum, Grassley, and Biden. I haven't sent a note to President Biden to remind him of a piece of legislation that we had tried and failed. But yes, and you admire those that have gone before us, who saw the Senate, and I'm speaking just of the Senate, a different time today.
You think about our history, the Constitution got established by compromise.
Yes.
Constant rolling compromises, and some of the big events in our history were around compromises. And it is harder now, there's no question. Speaking of compromise and bipartisanship, you did work with Ted Kennedy on health care.
Yes, I did.
How similar is that to what we tried to accomplish with Obamacare?
Well, he was chairman at that point of the Democrats committee that we were both serving on at that point, and cared a lot about trying to get a health care bill through. But it was Democrats and Republicans working together. It was the first real step in health care. And what it did was allow you to go working in another state, another job. You could not lose your health insurance. And it had some broader provisions, but even that was controversial. But it eventually passed with a large vote.
And pre-existing conditions was one of the aspects of the bill too, as I understand it.
Yes, it was a very health care. Though I had left the Senate by the time we get to the ACA, the major big health care bill which became so controversial you could hardly go into a room. And I talked in favor of it, even though by that time I was not so I could vote for it. I'd left the Senate. And people were adamantly opposed for various and different reasons. And the Secretary of HHD, or Secretary Sebelius is here, so I'm sure she knows the ups and downs of that legislation. And it still is true. We're still trying to decide what we want or don't want with health care. And I would argue, I think it's one of the most important issues for us to address as well here in Kansas. We have needs in health care, and particularly, I think now I look at the elderly, and needs to provide a kind of welcoming, nurturing environment where they're able to find needs, and we're getting there with assisted living and some good care there. But I think it's a very important issue for us.
Well, you know, I look at your life. I mean, so Senator Kassebaum studied political science at KU,
Yes.
went on to University of Michigan to get a graduate degree, and you come from a political background, but what compelled you to run for the Senate?
Well,
Not an easy decision. It couldn't have been an easy decision.
Well, I tell you, it wasn't one I ever thought of. My only election had been to the Board of Education in Mays, Kansas, where my children, 4 children, all went through school in Mays, Kansas, and ran for the Board of Education and really enjoyed it. Why are we quarreling about our boards of education today? Why are we not supporting our teachers with every ounce of strength that we have to encourage good teachers to be there working with students? I think it's so important. I never so there was an opening because Senator Pearson announced he was not going to seek re-election. And a lot of women in Wichita, Mays is right outside Wichita, it's pretty much been incorporated into Wichita, I think, now, but said, oh, it'd be a good time for a woman. And they were close friends of mine in Wichita, and they really started putting a group together, and I said, no, I don't think so, I'm not sure.
I mean, that's a big leap.
Yes, it was a big leap. And I talked to the family about it, who all sort of rolled their eyes. My dad, my father did not want me to run. I think he thought I would lose. And my mother said, yes, who cared not very much about politics, said, yes, I think you should.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah, Dad never, he did not support me at all.
But he had to be proud of you when you won.
Well, he probably took credit for it.
I mean, you have to say that's it's kind
Well,
of
I know Dad.
it's kind of a jewel in his own crown.
But I tell you, who helped me was Bob Dole.
Oh boy.
And I don't know if very many people realize that once I did announce, and I had formidable, and one reason I probably did fairly well, there were 7 of us running for that open seat, Republicans, and a very strong Democrat, Dr. Bill Roy. And it was an advantage, I have to say, to have that many. And I think people were simply surprised to see a little woman running around and going door to door in every town I went to, and called on his dad. Always said, go to the newspaper first, and then go to the kitchen when you stop in the restaurant. And that was my father's advice. And it's pretty good advice. Certainly walking door to door, going to the small towns, I really enjoyed that a lot. And I think it was not easy, But once I got the Republican nomination, Bob Dole was a big help.
I'll bet.
He might not want to say that, but he was. He very quietly helped talk to the Republican Party that I think was a little unsure of exactly who they had elected and what I would do. And probably Bob, as time went on, wonders why I did do some of the things I did. But he was very helpful. He was really very helpful at that point. It provided a lot of strength to the Republican Party that was beneficial to me.
I would imagine you and Senator Dole got along on most things, but I'm sure you also didn't get along on everything.
Or you wanted me to say what we didn't agree on?
Yeah, I would be interested in that, yes. Let me just say, here we have a Republican senator from Kansas who was for the ERA, pro-choice, for the Panama Canal treaties, anti-apartheid. These were not what you call Republican litmus test issues.
True.
And right now, I'm not sure how you would navigate your way in the halls of the Senate right now.
I don't think I could be elected today.
Yeah, that's a sad
I'm
note.
pretty sure.
So let's talk about your relationship with Senator Dole, what you agreed on, what you worked on, and what you didn't agree on.
That's hard, it's raking along my memory exactly what. Bob and I had a relationship that at times, I've seen this expressed, you could sink or swim. And he'd be there. It's your responsibility. There were things like the budget freeze, which we should have known better wasn't going to pass. But other issues we didn't agree on. One was gun control. I was very supportive of the Brady bill and of banning assault weapons. That would have been something Bob probably stayed out of that fight.
I don't think so.
So most of the things that I was in trouble with, Bob let me fight it out.
Fox News would have a field day with you, I think.
Yes, they would. Mm-hmm. And that's another issue that's changed a lot today. How do we get our news? How do we think about what's being debated and discussed? Major newspapers are gone. Mm-hmm. And everybody Zooms and Facebook and all of I don't do email even. So forget everybody who wants to send something that says terrible thought. You can't reach me. I don't do email either, and I get all these calls about someone wanting to know how I would vote on this or that, and I said, thank you, I appreciate your call, and hang up. It's an advantage to live in the middle of the Kansas prairie. I think with Bob, I can't think, there were issues that we didn't agree with. One would have been, all of the issues that are difficult, like abortion, guns. I have no trouble with guns, but a certain type of gun, to me, is not necessary for everyone to have. And I really think today is how do we get the news? How can we have a dialogue today if it isn't even possible in the United States Senate to have a really genuine dialogue between Republicans and Democrats? And that's what I think Bob would think too.
I agree. It's like a whole different place than I certainly experienced there, and
I did too.
You as well. When you got to the Senate, did you have an agenda, or did you have a plan, things you wanted to do?
No, just survive.
Well, you did a lot better than that. I look back at the years of Indiana being a Democrat, a liberal Democrat in Indiana was very difficult. Elections were won by a hair. You won overwhelmingly in your 2 re-elections.
3.
2 re-elections. That's right.
Oh, yeah.
3 elections, right. And Bi never won overwhelmingly and then lost the 4th time.
I think, again, it was partly because of dialogue. I think there were people who didn't agree with me, but they appreciated honesty. And I think today we hear so many different things in different places, as you say, different messages come across different radio, TV stations, or you pick it up on your Facebook or wherever you pick up things today. And there's gone is that chance to talk to groups with a dialogue. I'm sure there are just as many here who would disagree with me as agree. But that's what's important about our democracy. We cannot have people who are just going to be this way or that way. And that's what we're becoming in the Senate. It's the Democrats here and the Republicans here. And surely there is more of an opportunity to be able to have a dialogue that helps us get to where we wish to go. And that's a country that isn't going to feel insecure. I've always said it's sort of always between hope and doubt, that we are going to achieve something as the world changes around us. I've been asking, what would you do about these terrible situations abroad, in Prairie? Now we look to China, with enormous difficulties beginning to change, some happening in China. We have to be able to have they're still in lockdown, thousands in Shanghai. Well, this isn't something we're going to get into, but where do we go as we think the world as it's changing? What is our role? How do we encourage young people? And it's nice to see young people here today. And my own family would probably say, Mom, don't start rolling your eyes about young people and the need to be involved. But I think so. That's how you went door to door and campaigned for people. Mm-hmm. So that's changed. And do we necessarily need to get back? No, but I think we need to think where we can go forward. And Bob would be the first to say that. Bob Dole had a lot of difficulties that he faced, ones that most people would have found it impossible to handle, as he did. But he was determined to move forward. It wasn't staying back. He wanted to get a law degree. Difficult to do. But he was determined. And I think it's that gives some strength as we think about Senator Dole. It was the strength and yet humor. I've gotten every now and then a little steely eye looking at me, but he always had a sense of humor, and even when he might strongly disagree. And that, I think, again, was something he carried forward in his dialogue with other senators.
Oh, I think I remember the line after he lost the presidential race. He said that night he slept like a baby, cried all night.
I know. I know. It's that.
But you're right. You know, several times in this series, the guest speakers have brought up the subject of World War II, the World War II experience. And so many senators that had served in World War II of that generation, they were there to get something done and to work together. And there was accomplishment, a lot of accomplishment.
Yeah.
The reason I wrote the biography, I felt that Birch Bi's life had a lot of accomplishment in it. now I honestly wonder what, for instance, what do you think the Republican Party in the Senate is trying to accomplish right now?
Well, I'd like to know myself.
Okay. Fair question, right?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know how, and not to get into it, but there's an example of the nominee for the Supreme Court. Judge Jackson at that point, she will soon be Justice Jackson. But the Republicans barely could get 3 votes. The rest were all Democrats. And those 3 probably felt strongly about standing up, but weren't sure. That's hard to believe. And there wasn't even a dialogue of exchanging a debate
No.
that made it an interesting one. And I guess that's an example we see of how, and it's the same when Republicans put up something, the Democrats block it all. I don't know, Bob.
I don't either. I mean, I look back, again, part of the Birch Bayh story was that he wrote 2 constitutional amendments. And I would say now, what constitutional amendment could pass now? With 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of the states. I can't think of any issue
No,
that would pass with the constitutional amendment.
no.
So what was it like being the lone woman in the Senate when you got there?
Fun.
I'm not sure I want to explore this further.
No, it wasn't that. But, you know,
I read some of your lines at that time about serving coffee to the senators and sewing buttons on Bob Byrd's vest. And
I know, well, I think mostly it was probably people wonder if she can really be a senator. Will she stand up and be counted? And I think once or twice when I did do that, I sort of helped prove a point. Now, it doesn't always work. And as I say, I know full well I could not be reelected today. I think it's not that I've changed so much, but it's that everybody else is, again, we're all a little bit off on a different agenda. And that is what troubles me a little bit, because it's like being in doubt. It's sort of like hope and doubt. The insecurity that a lot of people, I believe, younger people feel today. And the tragedies that are sort of besetting some of the younger generation more than the older is, so where do they go? What is out there? And some have very clear goals of going into nursing or teaching and politics, but politics shouldn't be a profession. It should be something that you're there for. And Bob understood this. As long as he was there, it wasn't a profession. Yeah, I believe Bob really felt that it was something that was beyond just hoping something works out. It was wanting to get people to be engaged and enthused about a dialogue, whether you always agreed or not. Now, if you didn't agree sometimes with Bob, you knew it. But he usually did it with a sense of humor that left you realizing that there was a problem. But we've lost that. We've lost that today. And I blame it on social media, but that isn't fair either. I don't know.
well, I tried to explore in my book what has changed. I think the 24-hour news cycle has made a big difference. I think the proliferation of primaries has pushed both parties off to the edges. I think the gadgets, social media and the iPhone, I mean, they're all impacting the way our political dialogue operates now. Are you optimistic about the future?
Oh, yes. you have to remain optimistic. I'm now a great-grandmother, and so you work with the younger generation.
You know, I guess part of what I talk to my sons about is that there are no guarantees that our system is going to survive. It relies on civility, on the goodwill of the participants. And right now, I think we lack that. The question is, how do we get back to that? And I don't know if I have an answer, but I think that's the reason we wanted to explore this series was we have a whole generation of young people out there who have no experience with a Senate that works.
Well, maybe they think it does work, though.
Maybe.
They're one side or the other. Now there's a big question, even about teachers teaching, that parents should be the ones. Why are we having teachers? I would not have thought of speaking up to a teacher if I was growing up in those days. But a lot has changed, I think, in how we grow up and how we adjust. And I think we ought to be open to these dialogues that help us or help those who are interested, that you don't run for office as a profession. You should have an interest there of why and what's going on and how to do it. I don't have a good answer today. I wouldn't draw a crowd that would really want to hear what I think about the deficit. Let's take something that should be on our minds as well. The federal budget just keeps growing. But that's another matter, and I don't know.
I think you can draw a crowd. I think this is evidence that you can draw a crowd.
Well, but a lot of us are approximately viewing retirement age. Not everybody.
Don't make fun of my age, please.
Nor mine.
So when you decided not to run for re-election after 3 terms in the Senate, why did you decide to step aside? Because many people, as you know, never do.
Well, I married Howard Baker. And Howard was back in Tennessee. He retired in 1984. And so we split time between Tennessee and Kansas for a time. And then Howard was appointed ambassador to Japan. And so we lived 4 years in Japan.
That had to be a great experience.
It was. Enjoyed that a lot. And it wasn't, and then as a chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I have to say I really enjoyed that, and I was head of African Affairs. And I had an opportunity to work on an issue again that was controversial about sanctions in South Africa in ending apartheid. But I had the opportunity to visit Nelson Mandela a couple of times and get to know a number of really very thoughtful South African, and visited a number of countries, asked to monitor an election in Nigeria, which was not an easy experience. I don't know that I monitored much of anything except groups of people that didn't like what was going on. So,
well, going back to the question of you being the only woman in the Senate, and I think of things like the Senate gym and the bathrooms. There had to be some adjustments made, I would imagine.
well, not for me. I didn't go to the gym. I walked a lot. In fact, I probably should have done more, but I didn't. A lot of times the senators had a Republican table and a Democrat table, and it was in a room across from the public dining room, and it was just for senators. That's where, at first, I would have been the only woman, and I think it was Bob who took me to lunch there. And he said, Nancy, you've got to come over here. You can't just stay away from the senators because you're the only woman in the room there. And I said, well, but I wouldn't have come to lunch anyway. And but that's how Bob was really helpful when I was there then in the Senate, I think, opening.
We alluded a little bit to the fact that you got along on a lot of issues, but you didn't always get along. What were the biggest problems that you encountered with Bob Dole? I'm familiar.
Yeah.
I'm familiar that you were a Trump critic, which he was not.
Oh, that's right. That just almost flew by me.
Of course, that was not in the Senate. That was much later. But
Well, yeah, but that's true.
because I always found the dynamic between the two senators from the same state was you tried to get along on most things for the state, but you didn't always get along on other issues.
So you're using Trump as an example?
No, I'm not using Trump. Let's forget Trump. I'm not using Trump as an example. I'm just saying, and you worked with Bob Dole.
I think we did. I think working with Bob, we disagreed on the gun issue, for instance.
But it had to help you when he was the leader. It had to be great for your work with Kansas.
Oh, well, yes, I hope so. But I mean, Bob knew what he felt was important for Kansas, and we didn't always agree on all things, but that's okay, you know. Bob was an exceptional leader, and leadership is what we need everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are. It's being willing to listen and hear what you're hearing, and being able to respond when we can. I would love to know what everybody thinks here instead of my point of view on anything.
We're going to open up. We're going to open up for questions in a bit here. So, are there any memories that jump out at you? The things that you just think about a lot during those years in the Senate, or personalities that were important to you outside of, obviously, Senator Baker and Senator Dole?
Well, sure. I mean, I can't think offhand, but George Mitchell, was he not minority leader when Bob was majority?
And then they switched.
Then they switched. And those were personalities that could do that, because they cared about leadership and they cared about it being successful, I think, and balanced. And maybe that's kind of what we've lost, the sense of the importance of balance.
Don't you think also they cared about the institution?
Well, I would hope, but I'm not sure. Wouldn't you think they'd know that by now?
No, I would say that Bob Dole and George Mitchell would be two guys that really cared about the institution of the Senate.
Right. I thought you meant now.
No. I think that's an open question now about whether members really care about.
Well, some people run for office just because they think it's a good thing to do, and it becomes a profession.
Yes. I often say some people run to be something, and some run to do something.
And Bob certainly was one to do something.
Oh, I think there's no question, yes. So I think we're ready to take any questions if people have questions. Again, let me just repeat. I have a hard time describing what an honor it is to have you here as a way of concluding our 7 week program, and it's been great. And again, thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you, Bob, for coming.
And so let's open up for questions. Raise your hand, or someone back there with a microphone will help you out. And remember, those online, if you have a question, submit it to questions. Let me make sure I get this right. dolequestions@ku.edu.
I have a microphone. My name is Phil Friedemann, and I literally can say that I've been politically active from birth. I'm 84 years old, and I care passionately for our country. And I've come here today to ask this question. Nancy Kassebaum is a giant of the Senate, but I like the word distinguished. I want her to help me to get something straightened out about this country. And I really mean it. I know wherein I speak. I'm a Republican by birth, but no longer. And I cannot abide what's happened to the Republican Party, nor can many others abide. A distinguished Republican from Western Kansas said it like it was at our church after service. He said, I didn't leave the Republican Party. The Republican Party left me. And man, that resonated in the room, let me tell you. Now my question today, and I really mean it, this is by astute analysis. I read and I read and I read and I watch and I watch and I watch. And I'm still of the conviction that we need a strong two-party system, which I was taught in civics class. But I don't see the Republicans being a strong party any longer. They are committing, in my opinion, which may sound too dramatic, but I'll stick by it to my death. They are committing suicide on the installment plan. And that is the truth. And we have to stop that nonsense. I really mean that. We've got to take back our country and get us on track again.
Hi, I'm Bob Swan, ran for Congress in '68 without success, but ran against the war. Would you be tempted today, if you were Republican Senate, to change and run as a Democrat?
If I were in the Senate today, would I change and become a Democrat?
Running for re-election, and what has just been said about the Republicans,
Oh.
consider changing the party to be a Democrat?
Well, I really think the party should change first.
It's a lot easier for one person to change.
Because I do firmly believe in sound governance. I believe in a strong and healthy budget. I believe we need better management. Why do we have so many assistant secretaries? It's like it might be easy to find a ranch manager, but does anybody want to be an assistant ranch manager? They don't want to get up and bale hay at 6 in the morning to 8 in the morning. Everybody wants to be something other up there without having to really be engaged. I appreciate what you're saying. I still am a Republican, but I share your disappointment.
Yeah, he's walking around with the microphone.
Hi, thanks for coming out today. With your family's deep roots in Kansas and your great experience in Kansas, we've talked about a lot of the changes, or you have, social media, just things in general. Do you think Kansans have changed from when you served them to today, or something else changed? When you talk about how you couldn't get reelected, those were Kansans who elected you. Have we changed? I mean, we find other excuses, but have we changed, or is it just the world has changed and we're stuck in it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think we're stuck with it. I do think the world is changing because communications are changing. Everybody usually would have a Zoom. You could Zoom. You could have Facebook. The intimate dialogue is somewhat gone. It's interesting where you used to walk down Main Street, say in Council Grove, and there'd be the coffee shop and people stop in and talk at the coffee shop. Sort of those days are gone, and the younger generation is anxious to get out and get involved in doing something. Have we changed? I don't think we've changed as much as around us. We have different means of communication that are changing us. in a way. I think if we go, and there may be no desire to have more dialogue, I don't know. But I think that when we get into an issue, we have to engage with it somehow to get other people to believe it's possible. I see smaller towns growing, to tell you the truth, if I can put one on the map. Burdick won't grow much, but we do have a filling station still. And we solve a whole lot of things when I go down to have my tires checked or get some gas. It's surprising how those little bits of conversation can be really useful. One, they're usually repeated. But the world around us is changing too. So it's up for us, I think, to think through how you meet that as a dialogue, as a candidate. And do we have candidates who would go to door and be discussing anymore? Probably not. And maybe it doesn't make any difference.
You know, I'm not so sure you couldn't be reelected, but I am pretty sure you wouldn't enjoy it as much as you did when you were there. Next question. We have a bunch up here, Will.
Senator, I think that it's still too well a kept secret, the role you played in bringing the last national park into the system at that time and the preservation of the tall grass prairie. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I really do think that was a remarkable accomplishment and a remarkable legacy to leave, and it could only be done by somebody who cared deeply about the prairie the way you did and took that on as a real challenge.
Thank you, Secretary Sebelius. It was very special. But there were a lot of people that thought so too. And I couldn't have done it by myself. There were a lot of Kansans already who loved the Flint Hills and the tall grass prairie. But it was a lot of debate about it because there were other areas that wanted the designation and where would it be designated, how it would be run, and how it would do. It is something that I haven't been there for a couple of years. It used to be the symphony was there, and that was wonderful. And they've moved it now different places, which is probably a good idea. But the Tall Grass Prairie National Preserve is federal, so that can't change. The old house, the major house is still there, the stone house, and the barn, and there's areas there that are still part of the National Preserve. So thank you for mentioning it, because it had been a lot. And there's someone here who had, oh no, past you, wait a minute. She's had, this lady has had her hand up here.
Will, why don't you stay up front here? We have a bunch.
Well, she's right there on the side.
Yep. He's getting the microphone to her.
Thank you. Senator, as chairman of the KU Young Republicans, this was a couple of years ago, I was honored to be able to campaign for you and Senator Dole. So thank you for those wonderful memories. I do believe in term limits, except as it would apply to you or Senator Dole.
A lot of people have that attitude.
And after hearing you speak today, I would infer that perhaps you are also interested in term limits. Would like to hear your opinion on that.
Well, you feel like you would like it, but after all, you're elected. Where are those who would like to see you leave? They've got to get up and have an alternative. I think it would be a mistake myself to legislate term limits, as much as I don't know that it helps solve the problem. I don't know. How many here think term limits would be a good idea?
You know, my feeling is we're either a representative democracy or we're not. And
Yeah. I get out to vote for
you know, money in politics is one of the big issues that I think it leads to a lot of the long-term
Yes.
incumbents that we have because
Yes.
it's so expensive to run now.
That's true. That's a problem. Sue Ellen.
Thank you. I think that I'm not as much concerned about the loss of democracy as I am about the loss of truth.
I don't know if people could hear that.
Could you hear what I just said?
Now we can.
I'll try it again. I don't think I'm as much concerned about the loss of democracy as I am about the loss of truth.
Truth?
Yes, when Walter Cronkite said something, everybody knew that that was truth. When Nancy Kassebaum said something, everybody knew that that was truth.
Even if they disagreed, that's right.
Even if, but you were respected
Well, I think
and
that's
admired because of your truthfulness. And where do you think that's going to come from today?
Well, it will come. I have to be encouraged. I'm disappointed that we spend so much money in campaigns now. You do have to be willing to go door to door. You have to go to the small towns, I think, and be willing to discuss and talk and engage people. It's a different time. And I think what people are feeling insecure about today is the evening news, and first it's Ukraine and the tragedies. I look at the destruction there and the children, the babies. How do families exist? And I think of the strength it must take to tolerate and live in that kind of situation. And it makes you grateful for what we have in ways on beyond what so many people face. And how do we make those adjustments? I think today we have just as many people who are interested, but it's become expensive, and that's too bad. And so everybody's out raising money. And it does come to that, but if you're raising money, why not raise it for helping the assisted living facilities and so forth, and providing the care, because there is a growing number of the elderly today that I think mental health, I would say rather than illness, mental health is terribly important. When we're faced with sort of tragedies on the TV, and how do you deal with it? Do you look at it and you just think, oh gosh, glad I'm not there, which is true too. But I don't know, Bob. I don't have a good answer. I think money's become way too much of a problem in campaigns.
Oh, I don't think it's. You know, if the average congressional race now costs more than $1 million, which means that a member of Congress every day of the week for 730 days has to raise more than $1,300 a day just to stay in office. Founding fathers would roll over in their graves over something like this. When we lost our race in 1980, it cost $3 million to lose the race. $3 million is more like a typical race for Congress now.
Well, that's one of the problems. Does anybody have an answer?
Yep. We have a question back in the back.
A question.
Yeah, the Kansas legislature voted a while back on the Convention of States, and I was kind of wanted to get your thoughts and ideas on that.
Couldn't hear you.
The Convention of States?
Convention of States.
Yeah,
I don't know what the
Kansas legislature voted against it. Nebraska, maybe I don't have the right name, but they talked about Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Missouri voted in favor that they were going to go ahead and start term limits, but Kansas voted out of that.
Oh, to amend the Constitution? Well, you answered
Well,
that.
I'll tell you,
'cause-
there are two ways to amend the Constitution. Only one has ever been used, which is the typical process of 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of the Senate. If we were to hold another a constitutional convention, which I think this question alludes to, I would remind people that in our history, the last time we had a constitutional convention, it was to revise the Articles of Confederation, and they instead were thrown out, and we got a new constitution. And we were lucky what we got. What would we get now? And who would be in charge? And
Yeah.
who sets the rules? These are things actually my boss was having hearings on the last year he was in the Senate before we lost, because we saw this as a real potential problem. A constitutional convention could be a very dangerous thing.
Interesting.
That's my personal view.
Great.
She agrees.
Good answer.
Another question up here.
Thank you for being here. It's an honor, honestly. My question is, as the younger generation, what do you want to see from us to help mend the issues we see today in Senate?
Well, that's a good question, because I certainly think the younger generation, and I'm looking at, my own 7 grandchildren, who I have to say, a number graduated from K-State, but most of them also had a KU background, and I'm impressed. I'm very positive about the younger generation, but I think also there's a certain sense of challenge. What I want to say, sort of getting a channel to see how one should go. Some challenges out there that might interest, and where do they go? Do they go to just a group of 100 getting together somewhere with no idea? And I think maybe the challenge comes from having opportunities to be engaged. You'd probably have a better answer than I would on that. Mm-hmm. But I think that it comes, and you'll sense it when you find something that really intrigues you. Maybe you were required for a class to come today, but I don't think so. And I think the interest there you'll find. It'll find you.
Can we take one more question?
Yes, one more.
All right. It's 4 o'clock.
Keeping in mind that you were married to one, but are appearing at an institute named after the other, which did you like better as Senate Majority Leader, Howard Baker or Bob Dole?
Not fair.
Not fair.
Not fair.
This is something, Bob, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because this was something Bob cared a lot about. This institute, I think, meant a lot to Bob. And I think the fact it's at KU, Bob overcame a lot of challenges. He overcame his war wounds and other disappointments, losing the presidency. But he knew how to rise above that and continued to be an inspiration to the rest of us as a challenge. And I think that's what this institute represents. And it's a wonderful institute to him and to a generation that he saw come and go, but knew that you had to be engaged and you had to accept it as a responsibility and not make it a burden, but a goal. And maybe that's something that's special about this institute.
Well, everybody, I thank everyone for coming. This has been, for me, it's been a great journey doing this Giants of the Senate. I have to tell you, the professionalism of the staff at the Dole Institute has been totally impressive to me, and I learned a lot about what Kansas Nice is all about. And I have to tell you, it's a lot different living in the East Coast than it is being out here in Kansas. And I am honored beyond words for our guest today, Senator Nancy Landon Kassebaum, and I want to thank her again for showing up, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.